Hong Kong Electric fined in connection with Lama ferry crash. Over 50 die in floods in Liaoning province, and more fatalities in renewed violence in Egypt.
Good evening. Hong Kong Electric has been found guilty of failing to provide enough crew members on board the Lama 4, which sank in the National Day tragedy near Lama Island last year. The company was fined $900. Evelina Leung reports.
Hong Kong Electric said it respects the court's verdict and would discuss with its lawyers before deciding what it may do next. On October 1st last year, a Hong Kong Electric vessel, Lama 4, sank after colliding with a vessel run by Hong Kong and Kowloon Ferry. That left 39 people dead. Hong Kong Electric was accused of failing to provide adequate crew members on board its vessel. At the Eastern Magistracy today, Magistrate David Chum said a witness pointed out there were only 3 crew members on board Lama 4 at the time, but it was required to have 4. Chum also rejected Hong Kong Electric's argument that it had more than 3 crew members on board the ill-fated boat. And he said anyone on board but not trained to man a boat cannot be considered as a crew member. The magistrate also rejected the company's claims that the Marine Department had failed to provide it with a notice stating that 4 crew members were required. Chum said notices can come in different forms, and the requirement is clearly stated on Lama 4's license. The magistrate said in this court case he would only look into whether Hong Kong Electric had failed to comply with regulations and would not consider the consequences of the breach. The magistrate also pointed out that there was no evidence insufficient crew directly caused the tragedy. The company was slapped with a $900 fine. Evelina Lang, TVB News.
Families that plan to file lawsuits for compensation will have to find hard evidence to prove who is responsible for the Lama ferry accident. Legal scholars suggest they should wait for the results of the other court cases. Rani Samtani has more.
Lawyers who plan to file a case on behalf of the families that lost loved ones in the Lama ferry disaster will need sufficient evidence to prove that it was negligence that led to the accident.
Lawyers need to closely analyze the evidence to consider whether that party owes any duty of care to the victims, whether there's any breach, and even if there's any breach, whether there's any causative effect that led to the death or injury.
Families that would like to seek compensation will have to file a civil case within 3 years of the incident. Families will need to consider who to file their case against. Chung suggests that they should wait for the results and evidence from the other related court proceedings. The captains of the Lama 4 and the Hong Kong and Kowloon ferry vessel involved in the accident are awaiting trial. They each face 39 counts of manslaughter. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
Meanwhile, the High Court has adjourned hearing of an application by a former Marine Department staff to challenge the findings of a report into the Lama ferry disaster. Wong Chi-kin, a retired Marine Department surveyor, has sought a judicial review that he hopes he would overturn the findings. But today the judge said there was insufficient information and gave Wong 30 days to submit additional evidence. Wong is criticised for neglect of duty in the Commission of Inquiry's report on the disaster. In other news, heavy flooding has been blamed for the death of at least 54 people in Liaoning province. Dozens remain missing. Fushan City was among the hardest hit. Heavy rain in recent days triggered the flooding. About 2 million people have been affected across the province. Authorities say direct economic loss totals 8.5 billion yuan. Further south in the country, floods have triggered by heavy downpours left at least 22 people dead in Guangdong province. Meanwhile, train services have resumed along the Guangdong section of the Beijing-Guangzhou Railway. Landslides in that section forced a suspension of services earlier. The number of dead around the country has now topped 100.
Residents of the Japanese city of Kagoshima were busy washing ash off the streets today after a nearby volcano erupted. The Sakurajima volcano in the southern prefecture of Kyushu erupted yesterday afternoon. A large plume of ash rose 5 kilometers above the crater, the highest volcanic plume ever recorded for the active volcano. Massive ash falls made the area look as if it were snowing at night. Railway services were stopped temporarily to allow workers to remove ash from the tracks. People in Kagoshima put on masks and raincoats and used umbrellas to shield themselves from soot and ash. Local media said no injuries were reported. Sakurajima erupts often, and the Japan Meteorological Agency maintains a warning against people going near the volcano.
South Korea and the United States today began annual military drills despite signs of easing tension on the Korean peninsula. About 50,000 South Korean troops and 30,000 American soldiers are taking part in the war games that continue until the 30th of August. Also today, South Korean President Park Geun-hye presided over a National Security Council meeting. But not everyone supports the drills. A group of protesters rallied in Seoul, saying the military exercises would pose a threat to inter-Korean peace.
And turning to Egypt, dozens of suspected militants and policemen have been killed as fresh violence rocks the country. And as Jameson Wong reports, there was heated debate in the United States on whether aid to Egypt should be suspended.
No end in sight to the unrest in Egypt. As more members of the Muslim Brotherhood were arrested, the Egyptian Interior Ministry said 36 people died while they were being transported to prison yesterday. There are conflicting reports as to what happened. Officials say security forces fired tear gas after a riot broke out, and the victims suffocated in the back of a prison van. But other reports say authorities clashed with the suspected militants who came under fire while trying to flee. And in northern Sinai today, more than 20 policemen on board 2 buses were ambushed and killed by gunmen. Now, with hundreds killed across the country since Wednesday, Egypt's military ruler said enough is enough. Army Chief Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said yesterday he would not stand by silently watching the destruction of the country. But in an apparent olive branch, he also said Islamists must be included in Egyptian politics moving forward. The Muslim Brotherhood is demanding that ousted President Mohamed Morsi be reinstated. And while there's no coordinated international action yet to stop the bloodshed, there are growing calls for Washington to suspend aid to Egypt.
Now, with the recent violent crackdown, I do not see how we can continue aid. I believe it must be suspended.
One of the obvious facts of a transition from an authoritarian government to a democracy, it takes a long time and it's not a straight line. And so we have to have a policy that expresses our outrage, really, at the military, but also gives the president the tools to, we hope, engage them.
U.S. President Barack Obama has condemned the recent violence, but stopped short of suspending aid to Egypt. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
A British warship arrived in Gibraltar today for scheduled exercises amid tensions with Spain over fishing around the British Mediterranean enclave. The arrival of the frigate HMS Westminster came a day after Spanish fishermen in some 60 boats protested against the construction of an artificial reef. They say the reef is blocking their access to certain waters. Sonia Otero has more about the dispute.
In July, authorities in Gibraltar dumped concrete blocks into a shallow part of the bay to form an artificial reef on the basis it was protecting its fish stocks. The problem is, that's where commercial fishing boats from the neighboring Spanish town of La Línea regularly cross into shared waters that Gibraltar lays claim to. So in a show of protest, Spanish fishermen and some 60 fishing boats began circling the Bay of Gibraltar near the artificial reef to complain they can no longer fish there. Even though Spain has built similar reefs along its own coastline, it retaliated by implementing a go-slow policy at its narrow border crossing. The backlog caused hours-long wait times for tourists, workers, and shoppers. British Prime Minister David Cameron has warned his Spanish counterpart such border tensions are damaging relations between their countries. This British citizen agrees, hoping the two sides will work it out in peace.
I think people have just got to be sensible. It's like in any conflict, in negotiation and discussion, and come to an agreement rather than fight over it. That's the silly thing, isn't it?
Britain is also demanding the European Commission send a team of monitors to determine whether Spain's new border controls break EU law. Some Gibraltar citizens side with political analysts who say this is a ploy by Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy to distract Spaniards from a major corruption scandal now plaguing his People's Party.
The problem Gibraltar has is the Spanish government. They want to hide that Rajoy and all the Pepe have been stolen money from the whole of Gibraltar, Spain.
Rajoy vows to take all legal measures to defend his country's interests. Spain ceded sovereignty of Gibraltar to Britain in 1713, but has persistently sought to regain the tiny southern enclave. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
And this just in, Egyptian judiciary officials say former President Hosni Mubarak could be freed from custody this week. They say a court has ordered his release in a corruption case in which the former leader and his two sons are accused of embezzling funds for presidential palaces. Mubarak has been ordered released in two other court cases against him: the killing of protesters during the 2011 uprising that toppled him, and another over illegal earnings. Mubarak is being retried for the protesters' killing, but cannot be held in custody anymore because of a 2-year limit pending a final verdict. And still to come in the news, arsenic poses threat in Northeast New Territories Development Project. A pedestrian dies after being knocked down by an LRT train, and police arrest 6 in an attempted burglary in Aberdeen. Back. According to an environmental impact assessment report, arsenic found in the northeastern New Territories may be hazardous to health if the area is opened up for development. Although a government consultant insists the toxic heavy metal is unlikely to cause problems, he might not have allayed local people's fears. Kurdi Nandwani reports.
Villagers from the northeastern New Territories staged a demonstration in Wan Chai today as the Advisory Council on the Environment met to discuss an environmental impact assessment report in connection with the Northeast New Territories new development areas.
One of the most important things is that this area is the home of several thousand people who have spent more than 3 generations here. And secondly, it is one of the most important and one of the last agricultural regions in Hong Kong.
A high concentration of arsenic has been found deep in the earth in Kwu Tung, and the villagers fear that disturbing the earth will cause the toxic substance to seep into their water and pollute the air. They are angry that the public consultation period of the project lasts less than a month. The Environmental Impact Assessment report said workers will need to wear protective clothing because of the arsenic. Diggers will have to be covered and rinsed frequently to protect workers from breathing in too much of the chemical. And the earth's strata should be stabilized prior to construction works. Government consultants explained that the type of arsenic found there is of a less toxic kind, and that humans only absorb arsenic in water but not in the soil.
The report also said that once construction is completed, an estimated 118 hectares will still contain arsenic, still higher than an acceptable concentration.
But that, as opponents of the project pointed out, will only be in the area slated for public housing and not in the zone meant for low-density private development. Kirti Nandwani, TVB News.
A pedestrian was knocked down and killed by a light rail transit train in Tin Shui Wai this morning. The victim was suspected to have suddenly entered the track area, but police will also look into the speed of the train and whether there were any problems with the LRT signalling system. The 63-year-old man was run over at the junction of Tin Yu Road and Tin Wu Road in Tin Shui Wai at around 9 a.m. Police said a number 761P light rail transit train was approaching the area when a man suddenly ran onto the tracks. The driver was unable to stop the train in time and the man was dragged for about 50 meters along the tracks. He was certified dead at the scene. Acting Chief Inspector Kang Kwok Ming of the Police Accident Investigation Unit explains that the area was busy with rush hour traffic at the time and they're looking for eyewitnesses to find out what happened. People at the scene told police that the train had sounded its horn. As part of their investigation, police will also look into the speed of the train and whether there were any problems with the signalling system. The incident forced the diversion of some LRT trains. The railway company provided shuttle buses for passengers at the affected stops. 6 men who broke into a jewellery shop in Aberdeen this morning threw the burglar alarm into a bucket of water to try to reduce the sound, but they were caught red-handed by police. The 6 men were held by police inside the jewellery shop as officers carried out investigations at the scene. 3 of the suspects are from the mainland, while the other 3 are Hong Kong residents. Police say the men arrived on Wu Pak Street at around 4 a.m. in a van. 5 of them allegedly broke into the shop, while the 6th person stayed on board the vehicle. When the burglar alarm went off, they allegedly removed it and threw it into a bucket of water. Little did they know that police officers, acting on a tip-off, were lying in wait for them. The men were caught at the scene of the break-in. Police also arrested the 6th person who was waiting in the van. 2 of the men are believed to have entered Hong Kong illegally. Nothing was stolen from the shop today.
The family of a tour guide killed in the Manila bus hostage tragedy plans to file civil claims against the Philippine government. Meanwhile, Manila questioned why a black travel alert issued by Hong Kong remains in place. Vicky Kung has more.
Philippine presidential spokesman Edward Lesiada met with Hong Kong and mainland journalists in Manila ahead of the 3rd anniversary of the crisis that killed 8 people from Hong Kong.
As a Chinese also, I feel and I grieve the loss of our fellow Chinese in Hong Kong. It was very difficult for us.
He said since the tragedy in 2010, the Philippine government has taken measures to ensure the safety of visitors, such as deploying special police officers to protect tourists. Crisis management teams have also been set up to handle emergency situations. The spokesman questioned why a black travel alert to the Philippines is still in place.
It's very unfortunate that we're being compared to Syria, because I think Hong Kong has to also impose a black travel alert against Syria.
Here in Hong Kong, family members of tour guide Masa Te, who died in the tragedy, said they plan to file civil claims against the Philippine government at the High Court here before Thursday. The victim's brother, Che Chi Kin, said they're not concerned about the amount of compensation. He just hopes that the Philippine government will make an official apology to those killed. Vicky Kong, TVB News.
South African double amputee Olympian Oscar Pistorius, accused of shooting dead his girlfriend in February, has been indicted on charges of premeditated murder and illegal possession of ammunition. A court in the Pretoria has set the trial for March next year. It will last about 20 days and the prosecution has submitted a list of more than 100 witnesses. The man, known as the Blade Runner, appeared in court today for the indictment. Pistorius has said he shot his model girlfriend Reva Steenkamp by mistake, believing she was an intruder in his home. Prosecutors say he killed her after an argument. Over to you, Chris, for sport.
Thanks, Jenny. Jose Mourinho and Chelsea got off to a winning start to the new English Premier League season. The Blues beat Hull City 2-0 at Stamford Bridge. Jameson Wong has highlights.
Chelsea had a chance to go ahead after just 5 minutes, but Frank Lampard's kick from the penalty spot was turned away by the Hull keeper. But the Blues got their first goal of the season less than 10 minutes later. Oscar got free inside the box and tucked it away, 1-0 Chelsea. And Lampard made amends for the missed penalty with a stunning free kick before the half hour, 2-0 to the home side. That was the final score line. Jose Mourinho, a winner in his return to Stamford Bridge. The special one, happy one, relieved one, now with a 61-game unbeaten home record in the Premier League. Meanwhile, Tottenham won away at Crystal Palace. Roberto Soldado scored in his debut with Spurs. 1-0 the final score. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
Meanwhile, in Spain, defending La Liga champions Barcelona routed Levante 7-0 at the Nou Camp. Lionel Messi and Pedro each scored twice. New signing Neymar made his debut with the Catalans as a substitute, but failed to get on the score sheet. Meanwhile, Real Madrid left it late against Real Betis. Isco, who came over from Malaga, scored the game winner 4 minutes from time. 2-1 the final score at the Bernabeu. Tennis, and Rafael Nadal defeated John Isner to win the Cincinnati Open. It was Nadal's 4th straight Masters Series title and comes ahead of the year's final Grand Slam, the U.S. Open. There were no service breaks in the match between the Spaniard and the big serving American. Nadal won it in tiebreakers. Also in Cincinnati, Serena Williams was upset by Victoria Azarenka of Belarus. This was in straight sets. The scores were 6-2, 2-6, and 7-6. The loss snapped Williams' 14-match winning streak. And Usain Bolt won his 3rd gold medal at the World Championships in Moscow. Bolt ran the anchor leg for Jamaica's winning 4x100-meter relay team. The United States was 2nd, followed by Canada. Bolt also won world titles in the 100 meters and 200 meters. The 26-year-old now owns a total of 8 World Championship gold medals. The Jamaican men's and women's teams swept the gold medals in the sprint races.
Car enthusiasts from around the world flocked to the Cuban capital yesterday for the 9th annual Antique Car Rally. More than 60 antique cars and 15 classic motorcycles took part in the 70-kilometer rally that rips through various parts of Havana. Vehicles dating back to the 1930s, 40s, 50s and 60s were represented, including Chevrolet, Ford, Dodge and a few European cars. The oldest car taking part in the rally was a 1930 Ford Model A.
Taking part, I think this is very exciting to see what the
guest of honor was former Formula One driver David Coulthard from Scotland, who drove a 1955 Pontiac. A few years ago, former Cuban President Fidel Castro rendered these classic cars part of Cuba's national patrimony, making them treasures that can never leave the island. That's all for the news. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Good evening. The weather today was cloudy. There were showers and a few squally thunderstorms. And as tonight's situation chart shows, Tropical Storm Trami was centered about 860 kilometers east-southeast of Kaohsiung. It is forecast to move east-northeast at about 10 kilometers per hour at first, turning westwards later in the general direction of the seas north of Taiwan. Today's temperatures range from 26.3 to 29.8 degrees, and the relative humidity was between 79 and 98%. Moderate southerly winds. The current temperature is now 28 degrees Celsius with the relative humidity standing at 90%. 30.6 millimeters of rainfall has been recorded since midnight. So Freddie, how's the weather tomorrow? It will be mainly cloudy tonight. There will be a few showers and isolated thunderstorms. It will be hot with sunny intervals tomorrow. Temperatures will range between 27 and 32 degrees. It will be hot with sunny periods on Wednesday. Tomorrow's API is forecast at 15 to 90 and the pollution level will range from low to high. And the maximum UV intensity forecast for tomorrow will be about 11. And here's the latest global weather update. Showers in Shanghai and Xiamen, rain in Taipei. Cloudy in Guangzhou, bright in Macau, cloudy in Chengdu. Cloudy in Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo. Thunderstorms in Bangkok, bright in Ho Chi Minh City, rain in Manila. Showers in Kuala Lumpur, cloudy in Jakarta. Thunderstorms in New Delhi, showers in Karachi, rain in Mumbai. Rain in Cairo. Sunny in Brisbane and Sydney, showers in Melbourne and Auckland. Sunny in Toronto. Sunny in Vancouver, bright in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Bright in London, sunny in Paris and Zurich. And that's the weather. Have a lovely evening.